So, hi everyone. I'm sorry, I think there was a problem. Hi.
Hi, second go.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what was the
It's
problem.
okay. Yeah, no problem. It seems we're connected now, which is great.
Yeah, great. Good to see you.
You too. Good to see you. Yeah, it's great to connect and good to see everyone else
Yeah,
that's joining as well. Hello.
yeah, I think they're joining. I'm
Yeah.
very excited for tonight. I'm very excited about this topic. And this is
Y-
uh, titles and topics tonight.
Yeah,
Really,
likewise.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
think it would be really interesting. And I also think that it's something that everyone can relate to and everyone probably has something to say and can
exactly,
contribute
yeah.
to. So please do.
Yeah, and anyone in any approach, really, not just TA.
Mm.
So it's very good, and thank you again for accepting my invitation. It's very nice to have this talk with you.
Thank you for inviting me. I was absolutely delighted to receive your invitation, Ashkan, and to be part of this and to connect with everyone.
Really, my
In
pleasure. Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah, so
okay.
do you want to first give us a little bit of introduction of yourself, your background, your approach, to just get to know you a little bit more?
Yeah, sure.
Thank
So,
you.
hi everyone. um, I'm Hannah and I am a counsellor and psychotherapist. My training is a degree in humanistic counselling with transactional analysis. So, I trained for about 4 years. And before that, I studied anthropology, which I always mention because I think that it's so
Yeah.
vital to understand humans and how we connect and about our cultures and our societies. And that's always
Yeah,
been paramount in my approach. So, yeah.
yeah, very interesting. It was really interesting to me when I heard that first. You said I studied anthropology, and I
Mm,
really want to ask you to talk a little bit about that tonight. And how does
yeah.
that affect your therapy and your
Mm,
relational work, really? Having this
yeah.
kind of an insight of the human being. Yeah,
Mm, yeah, that's a
yeah,
great question. Yeah.
yeah.
Shall I come to that now or later?
If you think it's a good way to start, yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Just
Let's
how do
start
we
there.
see, yeah, how do we see human
Yeah.
in
And that's
person?
come
Yeah,
up. That's come up between us. So I think, if that's arisen now, then good time to address
yeah,
it.
I think so.
So yeah, actually, interestingly, I started studying psychology as my first degree, and I did sort of about 8 months maybe in Southampton in England where I studied. And I started to feel frustrated at how based around pathologies it was, about how
Mm,
cognitive and clinical it was. And it just wasn't chiming with me. There was something about it I didn't connect with. And so I thought, well, I think I'm going to do something else. I'm going to change course.
yeah.
And I did some sort of research and I thought anthropology, yeah, that sounds good. I'm going to go with that. And I didn't
Oh,
really think it through at the time. But I think that actually now, for me, anthropology is something which is more about what it means to be human and how we organize
yeah,
ourselves, our societies, our cultures, and our world around us, and what that means, and how we collect together, what it means about our identity, what it means about our gender constructions and our divisions of labor. It was much more about, I guess, what I wanted to do was study humans and what it means to be human. And that's what I found
yeah.
in anthropology that I couldn't find in psychology.
Yeah, that's right. And now that I think about some of the contextual um, insights that we have now about doing psychotherapy and how does the context affect our person-to-person relationship,
Mm.
anthropology can give us so much insight about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the traditional practice of gaining data in anthropology is called ethnography. And what
That's
it
right.
means is to go to another culture and fully immerse yourself as much as possible in that. So rather than studying another culture at home with a textbook, which is tokenly
Yeah.
called armchair anthropology, we need to go and live with the people that we're studying and to try and get into this zone, which I think is quite normal practice for psychotherapists, to get into this zone where you are totally immersed and trying to become part of that culture, and yet at the same
Yeah.
time removed from it and able to reflect on that and what it means. And that to me is the
Yeah.
same process as relational psychotherapy.
Yeah. So it's like you're always doing this ethnography when you are with a client. Yeah. When
Yeah.
you're trying to be immersed in their culture, even when you are so close and maybe living in the same town or maybe, yeah. So you, it's
Absolutely.
like,
It's like
yeah.
being in their world. You know, what is it like for them to experience their inner life and their external world as well? What does that mean to them? How do they attribute meaning to that? Can you feel that too? But then also, can you be removed enough to reflect on that with
Yeah.
them as a separate person? And yeah, that's
Yeah.
ethnography for me.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. It's very good to start with that, I think.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, to just connect it to the relational therapy and how do you see that? So do you want to just give us an explanation of what is relational work? How does it different with other kind of doing therapy? Yeah,
Sure. So, and I guess, you know, the all through our discussion, that's going to be answered in so many different ways. I
yeah,
guess, in short, for me, it's about putting process over content. So, as
mm,
well as hearing what the person is saying and connecting with that and, you know, discussing that with them, conversing, it's about
yeah,
noticing how they're saying it. And it's also about noticing our countertransferential responses. So, what am I feeling when I'm with this client? And when the client says that they feel sad, why am I feeling kind of
yeah,
agitated by that? And what might that mean? And how do I bring that to them in a way that can help them understand themselves more and to help them connect with themselves and make sense of that? So I guess
yeah,
it is, in the truest sense, about prioritizing the therapeutic relationship and that actually
yeah,
being the vehicle for the healing.
yeah, yeah, that's true. Thank you for giving this very short explanation, but we can also, yeah, think about, I mean, to start with titles, just to remind you what we wanted to talk about. Do
Sure.
you want to start with human development and how we
Yeah.
are born relational, really?
Yeah, that sounds
Yeah,
great.
as
Yeah.
soon
Yeah.
as we are born, we are in a relationship with our mother. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I like to think of that in the way that John Bowlby describes it
yeah,
in attachment theory. And so when we're born, unlike many other animals, human babies are pretty useless. We're quite defenseless. We can't do very much. And I always think of this when I watch maybe a nature program and you see, say, a reptile hatch from an egg, and they can immediately run away from
yeah,
danger or they can find food. You know, they don't
yeah,
rely or are heavily dependent on a caregiver. And human infants are. There's not much we can really do except for cry.
yeah,
And so Bowlby said, and of course he comes from a typical psychoanalytic background, and he said that actually attachment, therefore, for humans, that is our adaptive advantage. That's a
mm,
behavior that ensures our survival, to
yeah,
depend on a caregiver. And we've seen from other developmental psychologists, like Meltzoff and Moore, who did an experiment in the 70s where they found that from hours old, but certainly days, infants are already in a reciprocal relationship with the caregiver, and they are engaging in something called interactional synchrony, where they are almost in a dance of this attunement with the caregiver. And there's this mirroring going on. And the caregiver's role is to mirror the infant's emotional affective states. So I sometimes say, I teach some A-level psychology, and I sometimes say to my students, if you can imagine feeling hunger, but not knowing what that is, not knowing that you can relieve that by having something to eat, and then you'll feel totally fine again. It would feel quite painful, be like a big empty hole, a kind of gnawing in your stomach. And that could be really frightening if you didn't know what that was. And so you're probably going to cry out like a baby does. And then the caregiver attunes to that, and they will, you know, check the baby. Do they need changing? What might they be feeling? And they feed the infant. And then the infant learns, my needs were met and someone understood me, and I can gain support. And the same thing happens with emotional states. The baby might be feeling frightened and it cries, and the caregiver hopefully comes to the infant and, oh, it's okay, you don't need to be frightened, soothes the infant. And the infant, even before language is developed, learns something about themselves and about the other person, the caregiver, and about the world in those moments. So the self then starts to develop. You know, who am I? Who is this person? How is the world safe? Will my needs be met?
Can I trust this world and this person? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And I guess in terms of TA, that reminds me of Daniel Stern's work, where he says that the self never develops in isolation. The self is a development of that interaction that I've just been explaining. And so we form ourself and our sense of, I guess, our internal working models in psychoanalysis that Bowlby coined, a sort of network, a framework for, am I okay? Are other people okay? Is the world okay? So life positions.
The idea of life positions,
Yeah. So if our caregiver always comes to us, sorry, Ashkan, go on.
Yeah, I was thinking, so it's like we first have this experience of these emotions and this experience, and then we put that psychological story on it, what we call a script in TA. And we can really think of how relational this script can be when it's being made. How relationship is important in doing in making the script in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. I think that I agree. The roots of scripts are in relationship, in that early relationship. And for me, what happens in that is that if the caregiver is very well attuned, and doesn't have to be perfect, there's the whole notion from Winnicott as the good enough mother or the good enough other. And but what can happen is that if the attunement is strong, then the infant's sense of self will develop, and they'll start to have that idea that I'm okay, I'm safe, I cry, my needs are met most of the time, therefore other people are okay, and the world is pretty okay, it's a safe place. But if there's inconsistencies there, which can easily happen because, you know, humans aren't perfect and there is no manual for parenting, and most people don't know this information. And so if there's inconsistencies there, or the parent is unable to attune to the child, maybe they're depressed, maybe something else is going on, they just can't connect, maybe their own states are prioritized because that's how they need to be, then the infant might learn, when I cry, sometimes people come, sometimes they don't.
Sometimes they don't.
And they may also learn, therefore other people can't be trusted, and I don't feel very safe in the world. And that's the script for me. That's the development of the script. And I think it's important to note Clark kind of continued that in their work on deconfusion and confusion of the child ego state. is that when the child isn't attuned to consistently, they will then do what they need to keep that attachment in place, to keep that bond with the caregiver. They will alter themselves and their behavior to maintain that, because as we've talked about, they need to for survival.
Yeah.
They depend on that bond. And so then you've got things like injunctions and drivers coming in. If I do this, I'll get attention. If I ask in this way, my needs may
It's
get met.
the idea of adapted child, or the false self, that is beginning to being shaped in the early ages. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, yeah, I agree with you. The script is, for me, it's entirely relational. So it needs to be worked with relationally.
So do you want to talk about different styles of attachment or different processes of this adaptation that happens?
Yeah, I think that would be interesting. Yeah. And so if we look at the insecure types, because actually a lot of people are insecure, it's very hard to get data on attachment types that's accurate these days. But last time I found something useful, it's coming up to sort of 50-50 now in terms of secure attachment and insecure attachments. And in my therapy, I'm more likely to see people with insecure attachments, because there are relational issues that have maybe brought them to therapy. And so I guess with an anxious attachment style, that's similar to what I was describing in terms of the inconsistencies in the caregiving relationship. So sometimes the caregiver may have been there. Sometimes they may have been so there that actually the child didn't even have to cry. The caregiver was on it. And that can be a bit too close sometimes for the infant. They may feel intruded upon. It might feel engulfing or too much. And they may therefore fail to kind of see themselves and to develop themselves and just see the mother instead, or the other, whoever it is that's with them. Other times there may be, a withdrawal from the parent and the infant can't connect. So there's this kind of state of confusion and anxiety that comes from that. I don't know how to be, because I don't know what's going to come at me. Are they going to be too close? Are my needs going to be met? Are they not going to be there? And so there's this real internal sense of confusion, and that often comes out as an ambivalence, as a kind of a deep-seated anger of not being attuned to correctly, but often very adaptive on the surface.
Yeah, and as you're describing, I'm thinking about therapy and how these patterns can be repeated, and maybe this confusion is still there, and maybe that de-confusion really happens in the relationship when there is an attunement with the therapist, when there is a different kind of relationship there.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. When the therapist is offering a different relational experience.
Yeah. So the de-confusion is also relational.
Yeah. I believe so.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think as therapists, we may not actually know that we're doing deconfusion, because attunement isn't always a conscious thing. It's a process that happens between us, and we're feeling what the client feels, and therefore they feel heard, they feel seen, hopefully. And that is healing in itself. That's part of the deconfusion work.
Yeah. And it's so emotional, below the awareness of what's maybe happening in the long-term process. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So about personality adaptation that comes with these attachment styles, do you want to mention some of them, like borderline? How can this how can this happen after that unpredictable, inconsistent relationship with the mother?
And so I like Eleanor Greenberg, who is a Gestalt psychotherapist. I like her work on this, and James Masterson as well. And they describe the kind of the common personality adaptations that we may know of: borderline, narcissistic, and schizoid. Describe them as a kind of a longing for an unmet relational need that results in a way of being that replays what we didn't receive and looks for what we long to receive throughout the rest of our life, and particularly in relationship with others, whether that's a romantic relationship or a friendship. For me, I agree with what Greenberg says in terms of the borderline adaptation is about love, longing for love, longing for that attunement and that need to be seen. The narcissistic is more about longing for admiration and respect, and the schizoid is about safety. And what they mean to me is they're common patterns that can result from that lack of attunement in early life, and they're on a spectrum. So the disorder level is over here, but we may also have a process where we have some features of one or all of those types of personality structure, but they're not at a level which is considered in Western medicine to be a disorder.
Yeah, so really think that in a dynamic way, there can be interconnected patterns, and how it is important to see the need behind those patterns, not to just simply see the behavioral patterns and what the person is really, the content.
I think that's crucial. I think it's crucial because as well, when we hear those words in society, narcissistic or borderline or schizoid, I think it really frightens people. And I think that stigma can implicate people's sense of self even further. And often there's high levels of shame associated when we haven't had that early life attunement. Because it's an infant response to think, not why isn't my parent attuning to me? Why aren't they meeting my needs? But what is wrong with me? Why are they treating me this way? And to internalize that sense of shame. And so I think that in relational work, shelving really the diagnoses, the labels. Yeah, exactly. Shelving the labels is really important because not everybody will experience things the same. And that's the beauty of relational work, is that it is so unique. But those labels stick. They really stick, and they can do a lot of harm. So I think that actually working with what's underneath and how that process is manifesting for each person is crucial.
Yeah, last week I was talking to a therapist, a psychodynamic one, and she was talking about her experience with a client that after 4 years of therapy, the client asked, so do you think I have an OCD or I am an OCPD person? Do you think I have this label? Because I had therapists before who gave me this label, but it's 4 years that you didn't even talk about this word or this label. So I'm wondering, what do you think about me? So as you're saying, it sticks. So the person can always have this in the back of their mind that, am I like that? Do I have this label? Am I healed now, or am I good now? So it's the way of splitting happens. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And I wonder, hearing you say that, what that having that label meant to that client. And I would be interested in exploring what that meant to them.
Yeah,
because some people really want that. They want that label, which is interesting in itself, because I think that speaks to, apologies, my dog's running around in the background. If you can hear that, I will remove him. But I
don't hear that, but that's fine.
Okay. I think that speaks to the sort of the need to be fixed, and the need for another to come and rescue and save. And for me, that's part of what can be missing, that need to fulfill what was missing in early life. And often that's what people think they're going to get in therapy. But if we give that to them, then that can be quite disempowering and quite infantilizing, because then they can't create that for themselves. And although it's important to heal that need and what is missing, we're not the caregiver, and the client is not an infant anymore. And so we have to use our available adult to recognize that a new relational experience is actually what's needed, not a replacement of the old one. And that kind of brings me to think about Heather Fowley's work in terms of the longed for other and the feared other, which can often be held by the client in terms unconsciously, usually, but is this person, the therapist, are they going to repeat the patterns that my caregiver had? Are they going to shame me? Are they going to not hear me or see me? Will my needs not be met again? So there's that fear there about being vulnerable, but there's also that need for us to be ideal. Is this person going to give me all I need? Will they meet what I didn't have? But actually, if we are that, as amazing as it sounds, it's unrealistic. But it also is not in the service of the adult client, because it means that they are therefore not building it for themselves. You know, we're looking after them, we're rescuing them.
Yeah, and I'm thinking now about the idea of validation that Richard Erskine talks about. And we are there to validate, not to necessarily satisfy that need of the person, but to validate and respond to them.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm glad you brought up Erskine, because he's, you know, one of the key theorists and therapists in relational work, and someone whose work I love. And the model which he's created is incredibly simple: attunement, inquiry, and involvement. If we can give those things, if we can attune to the client and their affective states, if we can involve ourselves in their lives and what that is like for them, and allow ourselves to feel that and to be heavily impacted by the client, and if we can inquire in a way that's not shaming and that allows them to let us in that way, then actually that's the work.
Yeah, that's right. And makes me want to make a recommendation, because these days I'm reading his last book, The Healing Relationship.
Oh,
and
wow.
he also has some videos. It has a transcript of some therapy sessions, and you can see the videos of how he does that, and he has some explanations each part. Why am I doing this? How am I doing this attunement, inquiry, and involvement, all
Brilliant.
together. So I like to have this recommendation too.
Incredible.
Thank you. And I think you talked about transference and countertransfrence. Do you want to say some more about that?
Yeah, so a transference, I guess in a simplistic kind of way, is when the client is unconsciously projecting their relational expectations onto you or onto someone else in their life. You know, they'll do it in their lives as well as in therapy. We all do it. Some people have a lot more transference than others, and often a heavier transference means that the wound was a lot earlier in the caregiver relationship. And so it's kind of an expectation that the client is unaware of, usually from a split off part of the child ego state, maybe related to the internal working model, like this person will let me down at some point. And then that can transfer to their behavior because they're not aware of it. So it might be that you're feeling, as a therapist, invitations to disappoint the client or to let them down in some way. Maybe it's even just kind of not looking at them for part of the session, or, you know, breaking eye contact. Maybe it's you turning up late for a session, or forgetting about the client, or forgetting important details of their lives. And those feelings on your side as a therapist is the countertransference. It could be noticing that you feel bored, and wondering in supervision about what that means, which could lead to considering maybe the client is needing to use you to just talk at and chat, and that's what they need. That's part of the self-object in terms of psychoanalysis. They need you to just be a receptive container at that time. You are not allowed to be there as a person. You're not allowed to engage with them. And again, that brings us back to what it must have been like for that very young infant, for their caregiver to have been intrusive, maybe. So now they're defending against that by not letting people to be close.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want? I'm thinking about linking that to therapy for therapists.
Yeah. So I think if you're going to work,
affect your countertransference.
Yeah. I think for me, working relationally, if you are willing to do deep work with deeper states of people and are working at that level where you're trying to change relational expectations, maybe even working towards something like script cure or working with affective states, you are going to be and need to be impacted by the client. And if you're working with people with personality adaptations, their transferences will be very strong and you will be pulled into them. I think there's this thing about resisting transference, or, and I didn't fall into that trap. And maybe we feel like failures if we do fall into it, but actually people are seductive and powerful and they will get what they need in some way. And we have to survive. And so for me, working deeply with relational dynamics of the self and with people's identity, their emerging selves and their development, personal therapy is crucial to that, because I think otherwise we're at risk of acting all the time on our countertransference. We don't know much about ourselves and about how people are affecting us or impacting us. Then we may just join into that, and then we're playing out part of the script. And that's not therapy, that's a game.
Yeah. And it's interesting how different we see the games in TA theory now.
Yeah.
Comparing to the idea of Bern, the original of the classical view on the games, having that social control when you understand or realize you're playing a game. But now just letting the client understand the need of doing that game in a relational way. So see what's the need in that, see the transference happening in the game. How different do you see games in TA theory now rather than the original idea in the games people
absolutely
play?
I mean, a supervisor asked me last week, so what's the con and the gimmick in that game then, Hannah? And I was like, what? I don't know. Because I don't really use those classical concepts. And my supervisor, this supervisor in particular, I have a highly relational supervisor and I have a more classical supervisor. And it was the classical one that asked me. And I said, I don't know. I don't work with that. But I think the meaning behind the game is for this person, they end up feeling less than. And that's something that they're familiar with. They don't like it, but it's safe for them. So they get to feel not good enough. And so I guess that's, how I work with it is very similar to what you were saying. What is the meaning of that game for the client? Why do they need to play that? And what is it that is stopping them from being able to ask for what they need directly? Why do they need to get it via a game?
Yeah, so just what you described in the beginning, you're looking for the process rather than the content.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's easier for a client to join in with that and to understand that, and to, okay, so this is what I'm doing. This might be why I'm doing it. And therefore it's potentially easier for them to try something different. I'm aware that I want to act like a little girl and throw a tantrum so I get looked after and therefore my needs get met. But now that I know that, I could actually just ask directly and see what happens. And then they build a little bit more kind of evidence that actually that's okay and that they can do that. And then, you know, they're working on changing their own patterns, and there's power in that.
Yeah, and I remember when I was talking to you before this live, you mentioned that in my experience, clients like this kind of working better, and clients
Yeah.
prefer to work relational. And I want to hear a little more about your experience with that.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, I don't think I've actually thought of this or reflected on it too much before, but I think that is true. That's my experience. That's my felt experience. And when I check things out with clients, they're like, wow, I didn't realize this about myself. I think a lot of us have a real drive to know and understand ourselves. Particularly if we've had this early relational difficulties where we've not had the attunement we needed. I think because that often ends up in us not having a coherent narrative of ourselves and our lives, we kind of have a longing to form that coherent narrative. And it seems to bring quite a lot of symptomatic relief when people understand why they feel and think and behave as they do. Yeah, yeah. So I think, and I also think that, and I totally get that there's a place for it. I don't wish to dismantle important therapies like CBT. But I think that when people have not got that coherent narrative of themselves and their lives, CBT interventions maybe don't land with them. It's not something they can think about or really do, or it's not meaningful to them because it relies on logic so heavily, and that may be something that the person finds difficult and doesn't know why. Whereas working with affective states and feeling, and you know, how are you feeling about me, and etc. And now I've said that, I just noticed something else in that working relationally builds intimacy.
Yeah.
And even if someone is trying to defend against true intimacy, it's a nice feeling for humans. It's something that we need. And so building it in the therapeutic relationship can actually be really fun and warm and comforting and safe and inviting. Yeah, it can be a fun and a playful process, and it can be an intimate process. And I think that really plays on what we need as humans.
Yeah, and I liked that you talked about different modalities and different kinds of working. And what I understood from what you said is that the bottom-up approach that really relational work does, it can facilitate the top-down work that you can do after that. So
yeah,
it kind of makes it easier to have that kind of logical work afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I like that. I've not thought of it that way. I like how you've put words to that.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, something that's important in TA that is not necessarily relational is building the adult capacity, you know, in the adult ego state, and building capacity for the available adult so that the person can think for themselves, can engage in the present instead of living through transference, and can feel, therefore, the relief of being mindful and learning mindfulness, which is actually really difficult for a lot of people. And and I think actually doing that alongside important relational work like deconfusion of the child ego state is really great. They work well together.
Yeah, so I mean, building that capacity to be an adult, to think logically, to be in the here and now, needs a requirement that is that bottom of work can make that much easier to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it brings me to the work of trauma that I think you also do, and how does trauma can affect on this ability or capacity to being an adult.
Yeah, well, it kind of throws us out of adult. I think it can be, I think with any kind of trauma, whether it's a single event or whether it's relational trauma, misattunement, like I've been talking about, early relational trauma that we may not even realize we've had. We may just experience states like anxiety or withdrawal, and not know that there's a trauma basis in that. And I think that for me, it sort of throws us out of that adult ego state and puts us into a transferential state where we're trying to cope with split off parts of ourselves. We're coping with old patterns and mechanisms, and we're trying to employ those in the modern day, and they're not quite working out for us. We are really engaged in the reactive amygdala within the brain instead of the prefrontal cortex. So actually we can't engage in the part of ourselves that allows us to think, what options do I have in this situation? Not X and Y, but what is the whole range of ways that I could respond? Who is this person really, rather than as projecting, this person is my mother who didn't meet my needs. Yeah, it actually, I think trauma really impacts our ability to be an adult.
Yeah, one of the things that we know now about trauma, that this reaction or response is done much sooner than we can think about it. I'm thinking about polyvagal states, our neuroception response. This is done, the amygdala response is done much faster when we have experienced trauma. So how do you work on that relationally? How do you see that in the relationship? How do you recognize those responses with the clients?
Yeah, so I think it's about mirroring what's going on physically. Sometimes, you know, sometimes you notice someone's eyes glaze over and I think, oh, are they still here? What's going on for them? They maybe have dissociated or withdrawn in some way. And I think, and then I talk about that with them in a way that's as non-shaming as possible, maybe. And often I use my countertransference instead of saying your eyes glazed over, which can feel quite shaming. Oh, I suddenly feel disconnected from you. And I wonder what's just happened. Has something led you to withdraw slightly? And then just to kind of wonder about that with them, and they say, oh yeah, maybe I feel disconnected too, and I've just gone into this thinking, or I've just remembered something and I don't know why it's come up. And then to notice what's happened in the relationship that has led to that. Was there a rupture or something? Maybe you broke eye contact as a therapist and that felt like a rejection to the client. It can be really subtle signs. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm going to use myself as well, because I do in relational psychotherapy, because that's about, you know, relating to each other, two people there, two-person therapy. So I notice now in the camera how red my face is, you know, how much I'm blushing. I'm sitting in my attic room and it's very hot, but I'm also aware, you know, I'm talking to people online about my work and I feel vulnerable in that. And sometimes that makes me blush. That's part of, you know, my stuff. And so that's something that I guess is coming up now for me. That's something in our relationship, my relationship with Instagram, maybe, or my relationship with talking to you, who I don't know well, and talking to people who are joining and seeing names pop up. And so I think there's something about a willingness to be vulnerable as well, and to be alongside people when they are in a trauma state, as if you're going for a walk together and you're looking at the same view. From different perspectives. So I think that if you have formed a good therapeutic relationship that you're consistently working on, and there is attunement there, then that can contain the trauma, rather than going straight in session one before the relationship is built. I think the relationship's got to be strong before you can bring these things up and gain real growth from them.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, thank you for that. Well, do you want to talk about empathic transaction, because it's very related to this work of trauma and also to shame, as you described, and making the relationship non-shaming.
Yeah. And that can
Before
be
you say
hard.
that, I want to say, people just feel free to have your comments or questions. I can read them to Hannah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, please join in. I can see
Yeah.
them as well. So yeah, if you have
Yeah,
things
there
you
is a
want to say,
comment. Thank you for such a great discussion.
thank you. I think it's from Amir. I can't quite read it, but thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, if people have points they just want to say, it doesn't have to be a question. Come on in. Yeah,
Yeah.
please do
Yeah.
join.
Anything. Yeah.
Yeah, so shame. Shame is a massive part of this work, of working with the self. Shame and the feeling that we are bad inherently is the work for a lot of people in therapy. And it can be something that we're very sensitive to. Like I was saying, just a shift in eye contact can feel very rejecting to someone who's carrying a high level of shame. And being in relationship can feel shameful because shame is created often in relationship. And
Yeah.
so it's, you know, feeling exposed, feeling vulnerable is shaming for many people. And that's what you go to therapy for. And so actually, like, you know, you're at a bit of an impasse there if you can't create the
Mm.
relationship that will contain that shame. I think as therapists, we have to be okay with the fact that shame is going to be there. Sometimes our clients may feel shame in response to something we've said. And that's okay, as long as we can talk about it with them and we can wonder about it
Yeah.
with them. And for
Yeah.
me, part of that is about being curious rather than kind of
Mm.
punitive. Being curious, wondering, you know, I wonder why you would feel the need to withdraw like that. I wonder what withdrawing gives you. Rather than, you know, why
Yeah.
are you doing that, or come back to the relationship. And also playfulness. I think engaging as TA practitioners, some free child through adults in the therapy can
Yeah.
be really helpful. Using metaphor, using imagery, laughing with the client, you know,
Mm.
and kind of being like a kind of almost makes me think of like when two children are together and they're playing in terms of experience
Yeah.
the world in the same way. They're curious about it, they're open, they're interested. They're not
Mm-hmm.
attributing meaning when there isn't any. It's not kind of a top-down parent approach. That can be really great
Mm.
because I think, you know, it engages people. That's how we create friendships and relationships in real life. So it's okay to have
Yeah.
fun. And I
Yeah.
think that can be a
Yeah.
real reducer of shame.
Yeah. And I really, how I think about okay position is that a state of curiosity,
Yeah.
wanting to
Yeah.
explore. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that actually sometimes need to model that to the client or teach it to them. And I'm actually thinking of
Mm.
myself when I first began therapy several years ago. um,
Mm.
and every time my therapist would be like, let's be curious about that, I'd think, oh, for goodness sake, I didn't want to be curious about it. So I didn't have the
Yeah.
flexibility. I didn't want to explore. I didn't want to
Yeah.
be seen. I wanted to hide away behind all these walls that I would put up behind my defenses and not be seen. So I think
Mm.
sometimes we have to model that to the clients because there's a lot of modeling in relational work. You're not telling them what to do. You are showing them
Yeah.
a different way to be that they could possibly adopt if they wanted to. So I think the more curious
Yeah.
we can be, the more curious the client will be. I guess it's a permission.
That's right. For themselves and also for other relationships outside of the therapy room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So very powerful, the stuff you're talking about. I'm wondering if people have questions or comments about all this great stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, just feel free.
And I'm wondering if there's people who are watching who are therapists as well. What your connection to relational work is. Do you work relationally? Do you work more classically? What does the
Yeah.
relationship mean to you? I think those of us that work relationally, it's because we have a need for a relationship as well. You know, there's something about relational work that actually helps our own growth if we're considering transference and Countertransfrence. Thank you to the person who's just given a lovely stroke. I will take that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we're working with transference and countertransference, then actually we are gaining something for ourselves too. We're helping ourselves tolerate different states in others, helping ourselves relate authentically to someone. We're strengthening those parts of ourselves as therapists when we allow ourselves to be impacted.
So there is one question here. Is it a good approach to ask a new client if they got RSD? I don't know what that means. Or it's better to examine through sessions. So can you say what do you mean by RSD?
Can you say more?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting question. I would love to know more about what you mean. I'm not sure what RSD is.
Yeah, by the time they're asking, do you want to talk about the differences between 1.5, and 2% relation or
Yes.
relationship? Yeah.
Yeah, I will. This is something one of my supervisors refers to all the time. And it's something I sort of hold lightly, I guess. But it puts words to the fact that actually being deeply relational is too much for some clients. It feels too close again. It's too unfamiliar. It's not something they know how to manage, and therefore it can become unsafe. And so I think it was Clark that's done this theory about 1.5, and 2. Thank you for clarifying RSD. I'll come back to that in a minute.
Okay.
1.5, and 2-person ways of relating. And 1 person is where you're sort of a neutral object in terms of self-object. So you're another person, you're an observer. So you're thinking about the client. So you can hear the separation there, thinking about the client. So maybe the client's there and you notice something and you bring it to their attention. It sounds like you're feeling anxious about X, Y, Z. 1.5 person is where you become an empathic self-object. So the client can attach to part of you and use that for their own growth. So you're sort of there together, but it's not entirely together. You are feeling the client's feelings. So something that they're not saying may be occurring in you and your countertransference. And you may reflect on that with them.
I see it as kind of being a nurturing parent.
Yes,
when they
yes, I
cannot
like
be
that.
nurturing enough. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I really like that. I'm gonna borrow that. Thanks, Ashkan. Yeah, nurturing parent. Yeah, yeah, like a nurturing parent through adult. What are they missing that you can offer?
Yeah.
And then 2-person is, even though it sounds, 2-person sounds further apart, but it's actually closer together, is where you are an authentic other. You are there as your full authentic self in the relationship, and you are able to be impacted by the client and to use how that impacts you with the client for their own growth. So that is more deep sharing of your countertransference, something like with the situation I gave earlier. I noticed then that I was really distracted by what was going on outside, and that I'd actually tuned out from what you were saying. And I'm wondering what has happened between us that has led to that. And then discussing that together. And then, have you had that experience before? Maybe, what is it about the client that has led to you to withdraw from them, and from, is that happening elsewhere in their lives, or has it happened before in a time that they are replaying out with you? So that's the most deeply relational.
Yeah, and how I understand it in terms of ego states is like using all of your ego states fully, equally there. Yeah.
Tough.
Yeah.
Tough luck. I think I'm mostly 1.5, and sometimes 2. But I notice in sessions where I used to, I'm really tired afterwards, because you're giving a lot of yourself. And I think that is so important in this work to to attend to. You need to give a lot of yourself. So thinking about maybe you want fewer clients. Maybe even if you're in private practice, you need to charge more so that you can have a low client load that enables you to give so much of yourself and be so impacted by your clients. You probably need a lot of supervision, and you probably
And a
need to
lot
have
of
personal
personal
therapy.
therapy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
So I think
yeah.
it really is working deeply relational work is it's not even, I was going to say it's a vocation rather than a job, but I don't even think of that. I think it's a way of life. It's a way to connect it with yourself as much as it is with someone else.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. So do you want to answer to that question about rejection
Yeah.
sensitive dysphoria? Yeah.
I've not heard that term before. I think that maybe I just have a different name for it, or I know it as something else. Can you
Yeah,
read
me
the
too.
original question?
Yeah, I will read that to you.
And
Question is it a good approach to ask a new client if they got RSD, or it's better to examine through the process or through the sessions?
So what I'm interested in that question is the use of good, the word good. What would good mean to you as a therapist? What does good enough mean? And I would also invite you to engage in your countertransference. Does it feel like that's going to be the right thing to do? Is that the client's need? Is it your need? What does the client maybe need in that? Are they kind of reaching out or inviting you to give them a label? If so, I wonder about exploring with them what that label would give them. And why they might want that. And I think that maybe what would come up in that would be useful in terms of their growth, and in terms of, for you, the therapist, identifying what their relational expectations are, what their expectations of therapy are, what they want you to be for them. That's how I
Yeah.
would work with that relationally.
I'm thinking now about how different the process of assessment is in relational work, because it's a
Yeah,
process of,
yeah.
I think it's really a question about assessment, giving some labels, how different your assessment is when you're working relational in the beginning.
Yeah, I give quite a lot of thought to assessment actually, because it's something that I often feel frustrated with. And now I'm in private practice, I'm able to create my own style of assessment. And I ask the normal questions about risk, that kind of thing, but I guess I give time to explore the meaning behind them rather than just the
Yeah.
answer. A good example would be one of my questions on my assessment is, what happens to your relationship with food and drink when you're under stress? And I'm not waiting to hear someone say, I starve myself, so I can be like, right, they've got an eating disorder. But I'm asking so that I can then explore with that person, when they're in script, essentially, what does it mean to them to nourish themselves or deprive themselves, or not consider the value of what they're taking in? And then I think about that in terms of the caregiver relationship as well. Often not with the client, I would do that a bit afterwards in my own reflection, or possibly
Yeah.
in supervision. And then I just use those assessment questions to think, and the answers and things and what we've spoken about, to get a sense, a real felt sense of what life might be like for the client. Because often in assessment, you've got the presenting issues. The client has come for anxiety.
Yeah.
But actually, what's underneath that? Is it that they can't tolerate feeling anxious? Is it fear of uncertainty? Is it unaddressed trauma? What is going on for them? What is it about that anxiety that has led them to come to therapy? And how might we work with that? And actually, that can take a really long time. I think assessment is an ongoing process. And it has to be something that we regularly do with clients, and that we're always doing in our minds.
Yeah, so this assessment process is an ongoing process of understanding rather
Yeah.
than categorizing or labeling.
Yes, I like that. Yeah. In a kind of, how are we with one another? How are we getting to know each other? What does that mean?
Yeah, so Piotr just joined in and he says that I just got
Hi,
in, so
Piotr.
happy to be here. Yeah,
It's good to
we are
have
so
you.
happy that you're here. Yeah, well, it was really powerful. So we already had 1 hour now. So if there are,
Wow, have
oh,
we? I
yeah,
can't see a clock around me, so which is,
yeah, we had
a
one
novel thing
hour.
for a therapist. Gosh, that's
Yeah,
brilliant. I'm so glad that we've been able to engage so fully.
yeah, and I think I was totally immersed in that conversation and process. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for
Oh,
um, just beautifully explain all of these uh, powerful contents, really. So I'm thinking if there are any kind of questions or feedbacks or comments we can hear.
yes, feedback's welcome. Comments, questions, anything,
And I
any
know
contributions. And
many people will want to watch this video afterwards because some people told me they have therapy sessions just in this time.
yeah,
And they
at
will
this time.
they would like to see that data.
Yeah, absolutely. I did that with your discussion with Piotr last week. I was kind of coming in and out, but I
Oh
also
yeah,
had to do something else. It was I actually had parents' evening at the school that I teach at. So in between appointments, I
yeah,
would quickly log on. But then I watched it afterwards, and it was just as fruitful. I was just sad that I couldn't contribute as much as I'd have liked. But I think it's great that we have this medium to connect
yeah.
worldwide,
I agree.
and
Yeah,
to replay it.
yeah, yeah. And I want to invite people who will watch this later on to have comments or questions later on if they have. It was great to get to know you, Hannah. I'm excited to follow you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm excited to connect with you too.
Yeah, great. So I don't see any other questions for now. So maybe
Great.
afterwards, people will
Yes.
come and connect with you to maybe have some
Absolutely.
questions or comments. Yeah,
Yeah, please do leave comments if you're watching this on replay, and you have a question, leave a comment, send me a message, and I'll be happy to connect with you.
great. Thank you for being open to that. And again, thank you for accepting my invitation. It was really great talk for me, really my favorite topic. And I really enjoyed this 1 hour.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ashkan. I've really enjoyed it too. I've loved coming on and
Welcome.
having the opportunity to be heard and to talk about my work and as well, in terms of my own narrative and to connect with my own narrative of my professional work, I guess, and to have that
Yeah,
opportunity to think about, how I do work and how I can communicate that to you and others in our community. And it's been really great to connect with you. It's a privilege to be able to connect with you in Iran as well. For me, that's so
yeah.
important. So
Of
thank
course,
you.
for me, it's the same. Thank you. And I'm happy that it was enjoyable for you too. So
Absolutely.
I hope to see you another time. Maybe
Yeah,
have
me
another
too.
talk. I don't know, later. Thank you again. Do you want to say anything more, or we can say goodbye?
Yes, I'm happy to say good. Well, it's hard to say. I'm happy to say goodbye. I
Oh yeah,
couldn't finish
yeah,
that then. I'm not happy to say goodbye. I'm happy to say goodbye for now. Yes, I'd love
yeah,
to come back and talk more, and I'm sure that we'll connect shortly, Ashkan. But yeah, thank you. It's been a
yeah,
privilege.
yeah. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Uh, yeah, have a nice day.
You too. Good evening. Bye.
Yeah, bye for now.